All right, so we're going to finish up most of the notes in this packet today because we have a test over this unit. We're going to do the multiple choice portion on Wednesday, and then labeling of the diagrams, because there's quite a few of those. We're going to do that on Thursday. So it's going to go over a 2-day period. All right, so let's answer our journal first, and then we'll move on to our notes. So photosynthesis, does that take place in the plants or in the animals? Plants. Only takes place in plants. Or in algae, but any kind of autotroph. So what gas does photosynthesis use? Perfect. Carbon dioxide. And what gas does it release? Oxygen. You can put it as O2 or you can write out oxygen. That's why we get along so well with plants. They need CO2. We give off CO2. We need oxygen. They give off oxygen. So that's why some people like to have a lot of house plants. They believe it makes them more healthy. All righty, let's go to our notes. Okay. Yes, that's that one. Jalen, we have a test over this unit on the unit we've been using, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And Kaden too, I forgot you got out. On Thursday, no wait, on Wednesday we'll have a multiple choice portion, and then Thursday there'll be some diagrams. And I think there's a bonus on it where you can write those equations. A lot of y'all still hadn't memorized those, and when you took the quiz, it was not too good. But I had a couple of people that did okay on them. So go with those again and refresh your memory, because I think that's going to be an opportunity for some bonus points. All right, let's get to our notes. Actually, I could already have these open somewhere. So we kind of finished our notes over photosynthesis, so we're going to move on to the ones over cellular respiration. So it starts after, I think there's right here where you have Unit 5, cellular respiration. Yes. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about cellular respiration. Photosynthesis only occurs in plants and some algae, but cellular respiration actually occurs in animals, but also in plants and some algae. So whenever we talk about cellular respiration, all cells, organisms need ATP to carry out yes, ma'am. These are the notes that we've been working on. And I know you've been here for the notes. We did photosynthesis and cellular respiration. On the front, it doesn't look like this on the front. It says it looks like this on the front. All right, I'll see if I have any more copies. Make sure you get that number 1, because when I zoom in, I'll have to that'll disappear. Review, you good? They're still writing. I'll give her a minute. You good, Ruby? Okay. Just once I take that off and try to zoom in, it'll that a little bit better. All right, so number 2. I know y'all's number 2 will be farther down. Most organisms rely on glucose, which is what's produced from photosynthesis. Remember, it's a carbohydrate for food. And these are just some important points about cellular respiration, because cellular respiration takes that glucose produced in photosynthesis and puts it into ATP, which is really the form of energy that we need. Food is not a direct source of energy. So that kind of just goes back to what I just said. We talk about needing glucose, but it's really not the glucose we need. We need that glucose to be broken down through cellular respiration to give us the ATP. So it's an indirect form of energy. Organisms break down molecules in food to produce ATP. And remember, that happens in the organelle called the mitochondria, which we're going to talk a little bit more about today. The chloroplasts are important in photosynthesis. Mitochondria are important in cellular respiration. So breathing is vital to life. Because it supplies oxygen, obviously. I'm going to put O2 for oxygen. Needed for cellular respiration. And how we normally breathe, that's usually enough oxygen that is needed in cellular respiration to get the ATP we need. When you start doing really strenuous exercise for long, you get into what's called anaerobic exercise, and that's when you're not getting in enough oxygen to produce ATP that you need, and then the body changes and it gets a few ATP in a different way we're going to talk about. But if you've ever heard the difference between aerobic exercise and anaerobic exercise, like if you're a track person and you run a dash, a short distance, you can do that aerobically. You're getting in enough oxygen. But if you get to a long distance, it ends up being anaerobic. You get to a part where you're not getting enough oxygen to really be doing that exercise. Does anybody know something that happens if you run for a long period of time and don't have enough oxygen, a side effect of that? Or yes, you'll breathe faster, but in your legs. You ever get leg cramps? And that's from lactic acid buildup, and that's the side effect of that. So if you remember, for cellular respiration, this is our equation for cellular respiration. You have the glucose, which came from photosynthesis, combined with oxygen, and you need some enzymes, ENZYMES, that either can be on the top of your arrow or on the bottom. And that's going to produce water, carbon dioxide that can go back and be used by the plants, and ATP. Does anybody remember how many ATP? Altogether, it ends up being 36. Yes. Oh. Trying to make that into 36. I'm not having much luck. 30. That's supposed to 36. This thing keeps on giving me a message. I'm gonna have to get out of it. Anyway, put yourself a 36 there. I'm gonna have to probably jump out of this in a minute. 36 ATP, and we also have some heat that's given off, just kind of as a byproduct. So cellular respiration takes place in the cytoplasm of the mitochondria. And of eukaryotic cells, remember that means cells that have nuclei, and consist of 3 sets of reactions. So these are going to be your 3 sets of reaction. One is glycolysis. Number 2 is your Krebs cycle. And number 3 is your oxidative phosphorylation. And this is also called, hold on, I'm going to have to get out of here for a minute. Does everybody have that 1 through 5? All right, let me take myself a minute and try to get this thing to. All right, yes, I would like for you to display that, please. So those are my 3 different parts that make up this cellular respiration. Oxidative phosphorylation is more commonly called the electron transport chain. And I'm going to make that ETC shorthand. So glycolysis is the first part, and it actually occurs in the cytoplasm before it gets to the mitochondria. And it starts to break down a glucose. And we get 2 molecules of ATP from that little small portion. Then the Krebs cycle goes into the mitochondria, and it takes pyruvate, which came from glycolysis, and it breaks it down, and we get another 2 ATP. And then finally, this electron transport chain comes along, and that's also in the mitochondria, a different part of the mitochondria. It uses oxygen, and this is where we get the last 32 ATP. So you can see that's where you get your 36. We got 32 here, 2 here, and 2 here. So overall, if you add those up from the 3 different parts, that's where we get our 36. Glycolysis takes place before cellular respiration. In the cytoplasm. And leads to cellular respiration. So although it's included, it actually takes place outside of the mitochondria. So we're going to look in a little bit at those different places on the mitochondria. We're good? Let's go right. All righty. So ATP, that stands for adenosine or adenosine, how you pronounce it either way, triphosphate. And remember, that's because it has 3 phosphate groups. And the energy is gotten whenever the bond between the second and the third phosphate group is broken. So cells that require lots of energy contain more mitochondria. So they contain more mitochondria because they need more ATP. So in the human, can anybody think of what, and I think we did in that reading, we said that was the wings of what, dragonfly or fly. Can anybody think in a human what possible cells those might be that need more energy? Not red blood cells. What do you need whenever you do your exercise? Some of us have, we all have the same amount, but some of us are, no, I shouldn't say some of us. Some of y'all are more built up than others. How about muscles? Muscle cells. Also, when we do a lot of exercise, what beats real fast? Heart. So we also, heart cells would have a lot of mitochondria in them too. All right, I think that's about as much as I can shorten that page. All right, let's move on to the next page. All right, so glycolysis is the first part or the precursor to cellular respiration. And this one happens in the cytoplasm. So glycolysis breaks down glucose to pyruvate. And when glucose is broken down, some of the hydrogen atoms are stripped of their electrons, and they end up forming this NADH plus the H plus ion. And we talked about that earlier. That's just going to be an energy carrying molecule. It takes 2 ATP for glycolysis to occur, but then it produces 4. So it has a net total, as we said earlier, of 2 ATP. So overall, glycolysis will produce 2 ATP. So glycolysis, which is stands for the breakdown of glucose, is when the glucose is broken down into 2-pyruvate, and I'll spell that PYRUVATE plus 2 net ATP. It took 2 for it to get going. It produced 4, so overall we have a net of 2. Then from there, it goes into what's called the Krebs cycle, also called citric acid cycle. And this takes place in the mitochondrial matrix. And it's when it takes the pyruvate that were produced here, and now it's going to continue on. It moves into the mitochondria. And more specifically, the matrix of it. It uses an enzyme called acetylene coenzyme A. And that'll move through the Krebs cycle to produce 2 ATP and 6 CO2. So that's the second part of it. We have glycolysis is happening out in the cytoplasm. It gives me 2 ATP. My products from glycolysis move into the mitochondria and go through the first part, the Krebs cycle. It gives me 2 ATP there. And then we got one more section left as far as what happened in cellular respiration. So overall, we got those 2 molecules of ATP that are produced. All righty. We all good? Moving on up. All right, oxidative phosphorylation, which is really now called the electron transport chain, or the ETC, and this is where we get the large amount of our ATP, because remember we got to add it up to 36. So it continues on, and the electron transport chain takes oxygen plus the electrons that came off the hydrogen, and this is still in the mitochondria, but it's in the membrane of the mitochondria, so a little bit different area. And it goes through that process to give us 32 ATP. There's my other 32, plus 6 water, plus heat. So that's where we get our other 32, and then we put that with the 4 that we got through the other portions, and we get our total of 36. Oxygen, alrighty, I think we can live with that. I think we can live with that. This is all that we have left. No, I'm going to shorten. I'm going to try to shorten that. Yeah, no, I'm trying to shorten that. I'm going to shorten this, and then if I need to come back and add a little tomorrow after I look at the test, but we're not running on that, so bear with me. I'm trying to shorten it, believe it or not. I know it doesn't feel like it. I know it doesn't feel like it. All right. So this is our little nice picture. Finally, after all that, we'll probably look at another picture tomorrow. So this is our cellular respiration that shows where we're getting our different ATP. Instead of oxidative phosphorylation, we will call that the electron transport chain. this is occurring in the inner membranes of the mitochondria. Here we actually get 2 ATP. It's same thing, and this is where we get our 32, 6 CO2, 6 H2O, and also heat. And this is 2. Remember, glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm, so that occurs before it moves to the mitochondria. And the Krebs cycle is in the mitochondria, it's in the matrix. So both the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, they're both in the mitochondria, just in 2 different places. One's in the matrix and one's more in the membrane. All right. So cells cannot store a large amount of oxygen. So, and all these processes require oxygen, like the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So if the body does not have enough oxygen, and it doesn't have to be as something like it's being strangled, it could just be that maybe it's exercising heavily, or maybe you have a respiratory situation. But if it doesn't have enough oxygen, then it moves into what's called anaerobic production of ATP, and it's also called fermentation. So this is anaerobic, ANAEROBIC. Anaerobic means without oxygen. So we still need ATP. The body can't just not go and not have any ATP, so it has to find a different pathway, and it goes through something called fermentation, where a lot less ATP is being produced. So under fermentation, you still have the glycolysis part, because that part does not require it to have oxygen. Krebs cycle and the electron transport, both of those have to have oxygen. Glycolysis still does not have to have oxygen. So you can still get the 2 ATP here. And then after that, it moves into 2 different types of fermentation. Are we good? I'll move this up a little bit, so I'm going to lose this. All right. Almost there. So let's hit just the highlights with this. All right, so we said fermentation. I'm going to just write it down here. Y'all write it with wherever you want it. We're not writing all of this. We said there's 2 different types. So the first type is called lactic acid fermentation. I'm going to run out of room, but that should say fermentation. And this is used by human muscle cells. So if you ever get those cramps because you've been exercising a lot, or sometimes we just get cramps maybe at nighttime, this because there's a buildup of lactic acid, and that can cause cramps. And it produces a little bit of energy. The second kind is called alcoholic fermentation. And this is done by bacteria and yeast. So that's the kind that you need to move that up. I'm sorry. It says number 2 says alcoholic fermentation. Could y'all read that? And then under it, I just put bacteria, BACTERIA, and yeast, YEAST. So what is that used for? To make what? What does it sound like it's used for? Make alcohol, beer, wine, a lot of different types, probably other alcohols than that. Also for like if you like to bake and you have to do a yeast to get it to bubble and everything, to get your bread holes like we like it, make it light. It all comes from there. Alrighty, I think that is enough of that right now. And I'll look over the test, and if I need to add a few more things right there, I will. But I don't think we need to write all of this. So I think that is a good place to stop. So that pretty well gets us through our notes, except maybe having to label some things. And but so you can start studying today. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you can. All right, so we will continue on in preparing for the test tomorrow.